So hopefully you are watching this video and you are getting ready to take your quiz in a few minutes. Um, Before you do that, I just wanted to take a few moments and I guess take care of a few housekeeping type of issues. When I'm grading your homework and quizzes, as I'm doing so, I've been kind of creating a list of the things that you guys are sort of doing a little bit wrong. So like I said, I made a little bit of a list and I'm going to go through this real quick. I'm going to try to keep this video as short as possible. So as I said in my message to you guys the other day, the quiz is 12 questions. The first 2 are graphing. The next 4 are discriminant. These are multiple choice. You don't have to show me your work. You don't have to attach a picture. It's either 2 solutions, no solutions, or 1 solution. It's multiple choice. You gotta figure it out. And I'm just going to kind of trust that you know what you're doing with those and that you're doing it correctly and that, you make your choices. So those are going to be your 4 multiple choices. And then the other 6 problems are factoring, where you do need to show me your work, things like that. So let's start off with the graphing questions. So on the previous quiz, I gave you guys the little picture that had the graph, the table, and then all the information that you had to fill out. And you would do that with your finger on the iPad or a stylus if you had one. I got a lot of comments about how annoying that was for some reason. It just wasn't working very nicely. I tried it on my own before I had you guys do it, and I knew that it was a little bit wonky, but I thought that it would work, and I thought it would be the best option because personally I hate drawing my own graphs, and I know not all of you have printers, and not all of you are going to have access to graph paper. So I thought I was doing the best thing for you, but apparently it stinks. So this time I'm not going to put that picture up there. So that means that you're going to need to have a piece of paper in front of you, a notebook, something, when you take your quiz. And the first 2 questions that are graphing, you're going to have to make for me a table of values, draw your own graph, and answer those questions. Those questions are axis of symmetry, vertex, domain, range, and then the solutions. If you do not show me all of those parts, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to get your full credit. So make sure you do that. That's my first thing that I have written down here. Second of all, when we're talking about axis of symmetry, now I mentioned this in the video lesson and maybe some of you didn't catch it. Your axis of symmetry is a line. It is a vertical line that cuts, vertically through the parabola. It kind of cuts it in half. That's why it's symmetrical. Because axis of symmetry is a line, you cannot just put the number. You have to put x equals and then whatever number. So if your axis of symmetry is at 4, you need to be writing x equals 4. You cannot just put 4, okay? And when I saw this mistake happening on homework and quizzes so far, I have been taking off a half a point for that. So you're missing out on half credit because it's technically wrong. And I know that it seems like something that might be insignificant to you guys, but in the world of math, a line is x equals or y equals. So that part is important. Without that, it's not a line, it's just a number, and it makes absolutely no sense in context, okay? So make sure you're putting x equals. Don't lose silly points for something like that. Range, domain and range. Domain is horizontal x-axis, range is vertically with the y-axis. So the domain is really easy with all this stuff because it's always all real numbers. Because your parabola is always going to move left and right. But the range is the one that kind of determines up and down. So it's wherever your vertex is, and then if it's up to infinity, if it's down to negative infinity. So find out where that vertex is, and then it's either positive or negative infinity. Figure it out, When you get your axis of symmetry and you need to plug it back in for your vertex, please make sure you are putting those numbers in parentheses. So me personally, I will write it out. I will write out the equation with blank parentheses wherever there was an x, and you've seen me do that multiple times in my videos. And then I go in and plug in the number. Super important, because if you take a calculator, I've got one right here, and you put in -3 squared, -3 squared should be +9, but without parentheses around it, this is what your calculator says, -9. So having parentheses around numbers when you plug them in is going to make all the difference, especially if you're relying on something like this, okay? Also, solutions. So you should know by now that the way you find your solution when you're graphing is once it's graphed, you want to look at where it crosses the x-axis. A lot of you are getting a little bit confused because Where it says solutions, you're either putting the number 0, 1, or 2, depending on how many times across the x-axis. If I want to know how many solutions, then the question will specifically say, how many solutions are there? If it doesn't say how many, if it just says, what are the solutions, or tell me the solutions, yeah, that's great that there's 2 of them, but what are they? Where did it cross the x-axis? If it crossed at 1 and 4, then you need to put 1 and 4. If it crossed at 0 and -7, you need to put 0 and -7. Not just how many. So pay attention to the verbiage, I guess, in the questions if I'm asking you for how many. The only time I'm ever going to ask you how many solutions is when we're talking about the questions for discriminant. So that brings me to the discriminant. Another thing with discriminant is make sure, again, when you plug in those numbers, use parentheses, be careful, watch for your negatives. If a term is missing, A, B, or C, it becomes a 0. It's a 0. So you know your standard form, and if one of those is missing, it's 0, okay, when you use the discriminant. That brings me to factoring. Really don't have much to say about factoring because the 2 assignments that you guys have been submitting this week look pretty good. A lot of you are showing some really good work. I think the factoring component of this quiz is going to be the easy part because most of you already know how to factor. We've been doing it since February. So, and in fact, I had a video conference with somebody this morning and they said exactly what I'm saying. She said, the factoring is so easy. I've got that because we've been doing it in class even before the quarantine. And I said, exactly. So it's all the same factoring we've been doing all 3rd quarter. It's just that now after you factored it, you set them both equal to 0 and give me the solutions that way. So if you can factor and if you can solve a 2-step equation, then you should be good. So I like the work that I'm seeing. Make sure you show your work. The only thing I would say about factoring is that some of the questions on that quiz are worth 7, 8 points, depending on how complex the quadratic is and how many steps there are. And the reason it's so many points is because I have to see your work. I have to know that you know how to do every step. So 7 points might come from, did you set it equal to 0? Did you multiply the first number times the last number? Did you list out all the multiples? And once you found the right pair of numbers, did you replace the middle term? Did you group all 4, group your first 2 terms and group your second 2 terms, do grouping? Did you actually perform grouping correctly? When you got your answer, did you set them both equal to 0? What were the solutions when you set them equal to 0? I want to see all of those steps. So that's like 7, 8 steps right there. So some of them can get pretty lengthy, and then on the flip side of that, some of them are only worth 2 or 3 points because they're the easy factoring ones. So just be really careful. The really, really complicated ones, even if you don't really know how to do some parts of it, do what you can because you can always get partial credit. Like if all you can do is set it equal to 0 and take out a GCF and then from there you're stumped, hey, at least you're getting 2 or 3 points out of 8 instead of none. So don't leave anything blank. Make sure you're showing your work. Don't use photomath because the way that photomath has you write it down is very different from the way I have you write it down, and photomath skips certain steps, so I will be able to tell the difference. Use your notes, use your videos, use your homework assignments, anything else. There's a review right before your quiz. I made a review just like last time. Do that review. You can have it in front of you and use it. And even if I said you couldn't, would I know any better anyway? No.